women and young girls are being taught in universities, higher education, and schools to make demands and to wear the veil. So very firm measures must be taken, and it must simply be banned. And this is not going against our democracies. On the contrary, it is defending our democracies.
Alexa Lavoie for Rebel News. And Bill 21 and the recently adopted Bill 94 on secularism continue to spark debate in Quebec. Let me briefly explain the difference and why several Muslim women have brought the issue into the public spotlight in recent days. Adopted in 2019, Bill 21 bans visible religious symbols for people in positions of authority, such as teachers. However, the law included a grandfather clause. Those who were already wearing a religious symbol before June 2019 were allowed to continue doing so as long as they remained in the same position. Bill 94, adopted at the end of 2025, goes further by strengthening the enforcement of secularism rules across the entire school system. The result? Employees who are not protected by the grandfather clause must remove their religious symbols or risk losing their jobs. About a dozen veiled women have already resigned, and up to 500 employees could potentially be affected. This new legislation comes after roughly 17 schools were placed under investigation for failing to comply with the secularism law, raising concerns about religious influence in certain school environments, what some critics describe as the Islamization of children. But does this really address the root of the problem? Does restricting religious freedom across the board actually combat extremism and ideological influence? Meanwhile, Ottawa continues to provide $6 to $7 million per year to the Muslim Association of Canada, an organization that openly states it draws from the writings of Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, a movement banned and designed as a terrorist organization in several Arab countries. Though not in Canada, only Hamas, one of its offshoots, is currently listed as a terrorist organization here. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Fadila Maaroufi, a Belgian-Moroccan anthropologist, former social worker, secular activist, and specialist in radicalization and Islamism. I wanted to invite you because, first of all, in Quebec, we have strengthened our secularism law. There are several people in the school system, among others, including many women, who have chosen to resign to lose their jobs rather than remove the veil. And I wanted to better understand the phenomenon. Why is it so important for these women to keep the veil? Especially at a time when, as we can see, there are economic problems. People need a job, but for them, wearing the veil is more important.
So I think there are different reasons for that. I think the first reason is that for 40 years now, in our democratic countries, whether in Quebec or back home in Europe, in France and Belgium, we have seen a process of re-Islamization affecting certain people from Muslim background populations. The first generations of people who came to our countries came as they were, without the veil, and they integrated perfectly well. They came to work and so on. But then, little by little, we had people, imams, who came from other countries, such as Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries, and who were sent to, how shall I put it, re-Islamize immigrant background populations. We saw this in Europe, and I think we are much further along than you are, and even more so in Belgium than elsewhere, especially in France. All these mosques that were built, all these people who came, and all these Muslim countries such as Saudi Arabia, which heavily financed re-Islamization through an ideology we can call Salafist in nature. But we also had the Muslim Brotherhood, who came from Egypt because they were being pursued in that country. Since they could not return, they instead chose to change and re-Islamize the youth, because their aim is to turn our lands into a land of conversion, and then a land of Islam, since they cannot live in what they see as a land of unbelief. So all these generations, and I am one of them since I come from a third-generation family of Moroccan Muslim background, were subjected to attempts at re-Islamization. For many, that process worked. For others, less so. And unfortunately, many women accepted and adopted what they call a religious identity. That is to say, for every person, we normally have an identity that is more national. We belong to a nation, to a country. But as part of this re-Islamization, we were given an Islamic identity. We were told, you are not Belgian, you are not Moroccan, you are not Algerian, you are not this or that. You are Muslim, you belong to the Muslim community. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that, for many of these women, they are responding to a religious injunction. In other words, for a woman, it is obligatory. It is an obligation. It is not a choice. No matter when they say, I choose to wear the veil. No, they choose to submit. We have to be very clear about that, because it is considered a divine obligation. That is one thing. They can choose, if they want to keep a job, to say, all right, either I keep my job and remove my veil. But instead, they choose to withdraw. Why? Because in choosing to withdraw from their work and choosing not to work, they are making a political act. It is a political act. They come back with demands. In Belgium, we do not have secularism in the same way. We have neutrality, which is more or less the same thing. To simplify, it is roughly the same principle. We ask for neutrality. We ask that there be no visible signs of ideological or religious affiliation. So in fact, they will keep coming back with these same demands until the country accepts them or until the law accepts them. This is part of Islamist activism. In political Islam, it is always said that society must be made Sharia compatible. That means our secular Western societies must gradually accustom people to Islamic norms. So if we accept the veil, for example in education and so on, then after that it will spread everywhere and it will be imposed. And it will also be imposed on other women, because wearing the veil, it also signifies the separation of men and women. It reflects inequality between men and women. It also separates roles and tasks. There are things permitted for men, things permitted for women, and they are not the same. So there is inequality between men and women, and that also conflicts with our laws, which say that we must all be equal before the law. Women and men have the same rights and the same duties. So that is what must be clearly understood. Here, we are dealing with activist women who choose to withdraw and who will come back with their demands. They are not going to let it.
You mentioned that we are experiencing a re-Islamization in Western countries. Do you really think that this reform on secularism, by prohibiting religious symbols for people in position of authority, is really going to make a difference? Because many people oppose Bill 21 since it lumps all religions together. So it limits freedom of religion for everyone. Do you really think it will help stop a certain form of Islamization in the West?
Yes, because you know, and we know this very well, secular women who also come from these Muslim cultures know exactly what it means. I have met many women in women's groups, whether in Morocco, Senegal, other Muslim countries, or Turkey, and they all say the same thing. They say that from the moment there is pressure from women, or when women start arriving wearing the veil, they systematically pressure those who do not wear it to wear it too. They send us the message that we are impure compared to them, that we are women of bad character, that we are prostitutes, because we do not respect modesty, since for Muslim women, the veil also signifies modesty. And so, in a way, that is the image they project onto us. As a result, many Muslim women who do not want that religious system, once it becomes more and more imposed, no longer dare to speak up. And that is something we can verify when we know the reality from the inside, when we go and speak with these women and ask them discreetly, because it cannot be said openly. You know, these women who wear the veil, if they speak openly, when we ask them the question in front of others, in front of a camera, and so on, is it a choice? They are forced to say yes, because they know they are being watched, and they know full well that when they go home, they will face pressure from their families, from their community, who will say, "Why did you say this? Why did you say that?" Normally, you should be proud of it and say that it is your choice. So we really have to understand what that means. There is social pressure from the community. That is why it is very, very difficult. As for religion and the other religions, first of all, it is not forbidden to be Muslim, just as it is not forbidden to be Jewish or Christian. What is being asked is that when one is working, when one holds a position of authority, one should show neutrality so as not to influence vulnerable people such as children and young people, or when one has an authoritative function like police officers, judges, and so on. Because when you see someone openly displaying religious affiliation, you know very well that this person is influenced by the norms of their religion. And that will influence what people are willing to say in front of that person who symbolizes authority. We know very well, for example, that a woman who wants an abortion is certainly not going to go to a priest to talk about abortion, just as she is not going to go to an imam to discuss abortion, because she knows very well that he will bring a value judgment linked to religion. It is very important to display neutrality so that everyone can feel equal before the law. That is what it means. Now, when we look at our countries, the other religions, whether Christianity or Judaism, we no longer see religious demands from Christians or Jews in the workplace. All these demands for accommodations and so on at the religious level come mainly from people from the Muslim community. So we cannot put all religions on the same footing either, because it is not at all the same thing. In our countries, there is a separation between church and state. That struggle was fought in the 19th century. So we can clearly see that this is now respected by the church, for example, or by the Jewish community. On the other hand, for several decades now, the demands have come mainly from the Muslim religion, and that is where the problem lies. I think the problem is at that level because we have not understood, because our Western societies do not really know these religions well, nor all these Islamist movements.
We know that the Muslim Brotherhood has been banned or designed as a terrorist organization in some countries. In Canada, it has not yet been designated as a terrorist organization. But at the moment, Quebec is going to apply the secularism law. But I want to hear your concern when I tell you that right now, the Muslim Association of Canada, which is a major organization that oversees several mosques in Quebec and Canada, receives millions of dollars from the federal government. And on their website, they do not hide it. They teach the writings of Hassan al-Banna, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood.
So that is very concerning. Quebec absolutely must refuse and eliminate these subsidies. Personally, I think banning the Muslim Brotherhood will not achieve much because the Muslim Brotherhood no longer openly calls itself the Muslim Brotherhood. They hide it. They no longer say it. What must be examined are the writings. First, people must study who the Muslim Brotherhood are. What does it mean to be a Muslim brother? What is that ideology? Only then will you understand who you are dealing with and what ideology they are spreading. And that that is when firm sanctions can be taken, meaning ending subsidies, requiring them to respect the laws of the country, equality between men and women, and all the laws and freedoms of the country. That is what must be watched carefully. So yes, it is concerning, and unfortunately, in our Western countries, this is not happening only in Quebec. In our countries, too, associations that are linked to or close to the Muslim Brotherhood are still being funded.
For the people who don't know what is the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, can you explain in a simple way what it is?
The simplest way I could put it, without going into all the details about Hassan al-Banna and so on, for that there is an excellent book I recommend, Le Frérisme et ses réseaux, L'Enquête by Florence Berchaud-Blaclair, published in 2023, which really explains everything and the consequences as well. There is also Le Jihad par le Marché by the same author. But to put it simply, they want Islam to govern the individual, the community, and the country, both in private life and in public life. They want the laws of the state to be governed by Sharia law. They want the state to become a caliphate. That is the objective of the Muslim Brotherhood. The objective of brotherhood ideology is ultimately to bring about a state that becomes a caliphate, a global caliphate, and it spreads. It is completely transnational. That means it will not stop at Quebec, just as it'll not stop at Belgium or France. It operates in a transnational way. These people work together across borders. It adapts, depending on the context in which they live. The Muslim Brotherhood does not operate the same way in Quebec as it does where we live. They adapt according to your laws and our laws. And once they have adapted, they try to gain ground through every sector of society. So wherever they go, politically, in education, and so on, their objective is to spread Muslim Brotherhood ideology, a politico-religious vision that governs the individual wherever they are, but in an Islamic way.
And yet, knowing all this, why do Western governments, including in Canada and France, take no measures to act?
I think it is fear. First of all, as I was saying, those people have been in our countries for more than 40 years, and they have spread their ideology everywhere. They have studied our systems and infiltrated every sector of society. That must be clearly understood. And it is not conspiracy-minded to say that. At the political level, they are not there to take power directly. They first influence mindsets. They gently accustom non-Muslims to Islamic norms. And everything they do gently, not necessarily violently. They do it, as they say, softly, with a smile. So, of course, we get the impression that these are pleasant, smiling people. But in reality, they lull us to sleep. That is what I call a form of anesthesia. Of course, these are often very kind people. Most of the time they are kind. They smile at us, they offer cakes, and so on. But in reality, they are trying to influence us, sometimes make us feel guilty, create social bonds, and then change the way we see things so that we end up saying, oh, well, I have a friend, a neighbor, a colleague who is Muslim, and he is very nice. Why would I refuse this? For him, practicing Islam is important. It costs me very little. And that is how our minds get used to seeing Islamic norms. Little by little, they gain ground and end up imposing their rules. The same thing happens in sports. We see more and more in sports clubs young girls who play sports and want to impose the wearing of the veil in sports associations, Ramadan fasting, and so on. There are demands related to Ramadan fasting. So little by little, it does not happen all at once. It happens gradually to accustom us to it so that eventually we end up accepting it. They move in stages. And politicians do not see it because at a certain point they feel that there are so many Islamized people that they are afraid of retaliation. We must not forget that we have experienced many terrorist attacks. And of course, those who came and said, we will solve the problem. There will be no more terrorism, or the Muslim Brothers. But in reality, they feed the youth with the ideology that eventually leads to that outcome. Certainly, they would prefer to succeed without fighting and without setting the state on fire and bloodshed. But if they cannot succeed that way, they will use force. And when jihadists use force, they then come in as the saviors. And our states get the impression that these people are moderate, benevolent people and so on. In reality, they are not benevolent people. We saw it here after the terrorist attacks. Our countries closed some Salafist mosques and other mosques, and the Muslim Brotherhood came in saying, if you do not give us the keys to the mosque, the state will shut it down. So let us handle it. We can negotiate, because the Salafists do not negotiate, unlike the Muslim Brotherhood, which uses cunning. They are not direct. They are not frontal. Our politicians didn't see it, and they still do not see it. And there is fear. Fear of riots, fear of reactions, fear of terrorist attacks. That is why they are held back and do not know what to do. And I think it is time for them to listen to people, to experts who have studied this for more than 30 years and know what they are talking about, so they can give them leads and solutions based on the situation they are facing.
Because many people, especially women, left countries where Sharia exists in search of freedom, in search of secularism. How can we understand this return of Islamization when people fled their countries in search of a certain freedom?
Unfortunately, people like us, like me and others who speak out, are truly risking our lives. We are treated as traitors, traitors to the community, to the Islamic Ummah, to the Muslim community. And that is why fewer and fewer people dare to speak out, because the cost is very high. Or first of all, because obviously it is first and foremost the political left. You know, when you have a population arriving that can influence the vote, especially for the left, which has, of course, lost the working class vote, lost the vote of native people of Quebec origin, of Belgian origin, French origin. Those people have been replaced by this wave of immigration, people who have taken the nationality of that nation. And this becomes a political force for a left-wing party. They need electoral votes. And so they went after those votes. They made promises. And there are people, for example, in some mosques, elected officials go into mosques and promise things such as, we will give you land for €1 symbolic so you can build your mosque. And in return, you give us your votes. And that is how it is negotiated. It is negotiated through clientelism. So you have one part of it. If at first there were political parties or politicians who were naive and did not understand political Islam or these ideologies, we can say that now it is mostly about exchanges for votes. The Muslim vote, which has become very important.
Where you are now, in Brussels, you are experiencing Islamization far ahead of us. Do you think other measures are needed besides secularism laws to slow the phenomenon?
Secularism is very important because it slows it down. But secularism can also be overturned, and that is why it must also be defended. And defending it means taking very firm measures, refusing to allow these women to work wearing the veil. We must be very firm. We must ban the veiling of young girls. Where we live, in Brussels, the majority of women are veiled. What concerns us now is young girls who are being veiled younger and younger. So the veiling of young girls is an attack on the integrity of the child. I think it must be banned for minors. Absolutely. It must be banned in universities and higher education institutions as well. Very firm measures must be taken on these issues because, once again, we know very well that Islamization also happens through universities and education. We have seen it when we look at demonstrations within universities and so on. Women and young girls are being taught in universities, higher education, and schools to make demands and to wear the veil. So very firm measures must be taken and it must simply be banned. And this is not going against our democracies. On the contrary, it is defending our democracies.
What do we say to people who say, I wear the veil because I want to? How do we distinguish between those who are forced to wear it and those who want to wear it?
Those who want to wear it can wear it, but not at work simply. A choice has to be made, and that choice is very clear. Either you want to wear the veil, then you do so at home, but you do not wear it in the workplace. Because my choice is not to have to endure someone who constantly sends me the message that I am not equal to others, that I do not have the same rights as a man, that I am not a woman of good morals, and so on. It is an insult to women. That is what must be said to those people. They have the right to wear it if they want, but at home. They cannot wear it in the workplace, where they must respect the rules and the law of our democratic societies.
You campaigned for secularism. Can you tell us a little bit about what you yourself have faced? Because you have a personal story with the veil and Islamization. How has it unfolded for you?
I come from a third-generation Muslim family. I saw in the neighborhood where I grew up in Brussels, and later in my work as a social worker, what was happening. I worked with people from the Muslim population all over Brussels and elsewhere. I supported many of these families, and by supporting them, I came to know them intimately. Not what they show on the outside with a smile, or what they are willing to project publicly. I saw what they really live through internally, within the community and within their own families, all the violence they experienced, all the pressure they experienced. These same people, when I now hear them say it is their choice and so on, I know them from the inside. I know what they are living through, and I know their real motivations. And it is not at all the same thing, and they know very well they cannot lie to me. They cannot look me in the eye and say, "No, it's my choice." They know very well that I know because they have told me themselves. I lived it myself. I was forced into marriage when I was young and so on, so I know very, very well how it works from the inside. On the other hand, what they really want is to influence those who do not know the reality from the inside. If you like, those are the people they consider what Lenin called useful idiots, those who do not know the inside reality, and to whom they can make almost anything seem believable. Do you see? That is why it is so important to listen to women who come from these communities, because they have lived this in their flesh, with the violence and everything that comes with it. We fought to gain our freedoms, and we are still paying the price. That is to say, every day we risk our lives because we are trying to explain to you what could happen to you and what freedom you risk losing. We fought for these freedoms, and we do not want to lose them again. We know very well what it is like to live shut in. We know what it costs us in terms of violence as women to be locked down, enclosed under a veil. Being enclosed under a veil is not nothing. It means all the movements that are not permitted. We hide ourselves. We hide our femininity. We hide ourselves as women. In reality, what we are doing under that veil is erasing the woman. When you look at what is happening, for example, in Afghanistan, the situation of women there is the final outcome of what will happen once Islamists come to power. That is what we must tell ourselves.
Why do we not hear voices like yours or Florence Bergeau-Blackler's in the media?
Because the media, especially left-wing media for the most part, do not want to hear us. These are people who, for decades, have closed their eyes to this. You know, as we always say in sociology and anthropology, many of those who have studied Islam have glorified it, elevated it, even eroticized it, if you will. They have only shown the positive side. Why? Because when you study a group of people as a researcher like Florence or others, whatever group you are studying, if you criticize it, they may close their doors to you and you may lose access to that research. And many sociologists, researchers, and anthropologists unfortunately prefer to say positive things about Muslim countries or the groups they study so they can continue to be funded, continue to have access, and continue to work in universities. Because if they tell the truth, if they say exactly what they see, they risk losing financial support. Many of these university studies have also been funded by countries such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others. They have funded a great deal. For the media, it is the same thing. So the people we have always heard in the media are the so-called specialists from those universities, who only ever present one perspective and only give the positive side of Islam. And when people talk about Islam, they do not criticize it. They talk instead about Islamophobia. And we know now, for example in Europe, that the European Union and European institutions fund the fight against Islamophobia. That is not for nothing. All that money being spent is because they are influenced by brotherhood-linked associations, and we know who they are. In Florence, Berjo Blackler's book, she names them, and they receive thousands of euros. Their objective is to influence Europe's norms. It is to say, if you want to fight discrimination against minorities, then fund the fight against Islamophobia, because that is supposedly the real problem in society. But that is not true. When we look at what happens after every terrorist attack, all governments say, do not make amalgamations. And we have seen that populations have never stirred up hatred against Muslims. They have never equated Muslims with Islamists. A distinction is made between Islamist ideologies and Muslims. It is not the same thing at all. There are Muslims who simply want to practice their religion without asking for anything in return, without making a public spectacle of it. They live their faith inwardly and privately. But then there are those who make demands, and those people are clearly activists. And those people, yes, belong to activist networks. They are funded, they are supported, and they can hold key positions throughout society.
At Rebel News, we started a petition at banthemuslimbrotherhood.com. We want that the Muslim Brotherhood be listed as a terrorist organization and banned for operating here in Canada. Arab countries have understood, but we still didn't. So go and sign our petition at banthemuslimbrotherhood.com right now.